Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Welcome to the Living Free Show on 3CR Community Radio, 855 kilohertz on your AM dial. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, traditional owners of the land from which 3CR transmits people-powered radio. Hi, I'm Bill, and each week on the Living Free Show, we showcase one of the 12-step programs that assists recovery from drugs, alcohol, gambling and food addictions. Our guests share their recovery story and highlight that shared experience saves lives. Today, our guest is a compulsive gambler who's recovering with the help of Gamblers Anonymous. I'd like to welcome Michael to the show. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Bill.
Michael, you've been on the show before, actually 2019 and 2020, so I'm glad to have you back.
Thank you.
The last time we chatted, we talked about, I think it was in July 2020, I think we just entered the second lockdown in Melbourne for COVID. But I thought if we start off, do you want to give us a quick recap of your gambling, just to set the scene?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm 55 years old. I can't say I was a committed gambler from the teenage years. I grew up in a household where sort of punting on animals, horse racing and that sort of thing was not really the done thing. In fact, it was kind of looked down upon as a bit perhaps low class. My parents were migrants. They would meet with other migrants and play cards. And so I grew up watching them, and considered that card playing was a social thing, was a friendly thing, part of socializing with people. But I never really gave it another thought. I mean, like many families, our family played the weekly lottery and, was occasionally had dreams of winning the top prize, but really nothing that could be considered problematic until later years when my first marriage was breaking down. And I guess in retrospect, as a person, I was not a particularly mature person and hadn't really learnt to deal with emotionally stressful situations. So when my first marriage was breaking down, I don't even know why I did it. I turned to the pokies. I sort of decided to go to a venue and just to kill the time and sort of block out my thoughts. And it was very effective. And I won big that first time I did it. And that absolutely set my neural pathways. I discovered what I needed in terms of numbing out my feelings and being able to avoid having to think about my situation. And of course, like all addictions, I guess, the solution quickly became a problem in and of itself. And I found myself skiving off work to go to the casino, playing blackjack, playing pokies, playing, other games there. I would often go in, with a really strong view that I would limit my spending and, I would, despite having that view, I would sort of hit the ATM, 3, 4, 5 times in the space of a few hours, and then literally walk out with nothing. I mean, I remember lunch times when I would go from work, I would go to the casino, and I actually remember times when I thought, I've got to leave myself enough for a dim sum and a bag of chips, right, for lunch. And I couldn't even do that. So my control was absolutely shot to pieces. I had no control. And the way I sort of got found out or caught was an intercepted credit card statement. My wife picked it up and opened it and had a look, and she was horrified. And there were tears and recriminations. And the first time that happened, I went to Gamblers Help, and that didn't really work for me. The counsellor was well-meaning, but suggested that I had an option of trying to abstain or trying to control my gambling, and I ended up back gambling again very quickly. Got caught a second time, and that's when I got to GA, and that was in 1998.
Do you want to just go back to the Gamblers Help? Can you just talk us through what their advice meant to you at the time?
Well, see, I didn't think I had a gambling problem. I thought I had a money problem and a getting caught problem. And I didn't want to stop gambling per se. I still wanted to self-medicate, psychologically self-medicate in that way. I just wanted to be able to do it without losing, every dollar in my pocket and without upsetting the missus. And this is, I think, where the option of trying to control my gambling was very attractive. It meant that I could keep doing what I was doing without looking at the whys of why I was doing it, trying to control and manage the symptom, which was the gambling, instead of trying to look into why was I gambling in the first place.
Yeah. So how long did you try to just control your gambling?
It would have been less than 6 months. The interesting thing was that, sort of before I was caught the first time, we had separate finances. As a result of getting caught, we did set up joint finances. So there was absolutely no way that if I was gambling again, I couldn't get caught. Right? If I was gambling uncontrollably.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's exactly what happened. So even though, I guess the interesting thing there is that despite the knowledge that I would get caught, that knowledge and knowledge of the consequences of what that would mean still was not enough to stop me from doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The just that recklessness that the gambling induces in you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complete abandon, and I think maybe thinking about it now, I think part of, if I think of my gambling specifically, which was really an escape from dealing with things, and kind of perpetually kicking the can of having to deal with reality down the road. I think, again, the same thing with the prospect of getting caught. I knew it would happen intellectually, but I just didn't want to deal. I wanted to kick that down the road, and so that's what I did anyway.
Yeah, interesting thing, isn't it? So what was it that caused you to think about going to GA then?
Well, I knew that at that point, when I got caught the second time, I knew that I was about to lose my young family. We had an 11-month-old. We had only been married for less than 18 months. And I thought that was all at risk. I was suicidal. I was totally not present at work, really, not effective. So that was at risk as well. Really everything was at risk. I was on the cusp of losing everything. And I thought, well, I had to do something drastic and dramatic. Clearly, gamblers' help and counselling hadn't helped at all. And I thought, well, there's only one option for me, and that's just to not do it at all.
Yeah. So how did you find out about Gamblers Anonymous?
Coincidentally, where I was working at the time, that organisation employed counsellors for our clients, for the clients that we had, and I'm talking sort of social counsellors. And I, when I got the phone call from my wife, it was during a workday, and I just went into that guy's office, the counsellor, and I sort of broke down and I told him what had happened. And he suggested Gamblers Anonymous to me.
So what was it like going and meeting other gamblers? Because gamblers typically, although the TV advertising is different, gamblers typically are very, very much loners. They gamble on their own.
Yeah.
Or problem gamblers, I'm saying. So what was it like going and meeting all these other gamblers?
It was remarkable, actually. I mean, my very first meeting was on a Monday night in Carlton, and I don't remember a lot of detail because the one thing I do remember was that I was crying through most of it, or sobbing through most of it. But what really stuck with me was this overwhelming, welcoming warmth, care, understanding, total absence of judgment. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. And it was quite remarkable, actually. I will never forget that feeling. It really gave me hope. I was in the pit of despair, and then somehow these people just understood. I mean, trying to explain it to my wife why I was doing these things, because of course all addicts get asked why, and especially with gambling, people just stop, just don't go, right? And it's hard to articulate what that compulsion is like and why you just can't stop. And those people all got it. And so it was really good. And in hindsight, it's funny because I've come to realize that you're right. A lot of compulsive gamblers, it's all about the isolation, not just from one another, from family, from friends, from work, from everything. And that the cure, or not cure, but the treatment is really connection. GA is all about connection.
Yeah, that's the thing. And you get a lot of benefit from reaching out to other people and being involved in helping them to understand the problem as well. You learn a lot from helping others. So how much has that influenced your recovery, being involved with others and helping others?
Oh, hugely, hugely. It's one of the things I really love. A number of years ago, I think it was 2016, we had restarted the Burke Street meeting. We'd have over the years a few attempts at having a city-based meeting. And I thought, oh, well, let's have another crack. And we started that up. And I felt so energized by kind of taking that on. I think it lasted for about 15 months before it sort of faded again. I mean, I don't know, for some reason, people don't want to do lunchtime meetings in the city.
Interferes with their gambling.
Well, yeah, yes. And, it's funny because that's exactly what I thought. I thought if we give people an alternative, but anyway, look, for whatever reason, it didn't really take off, not in the numbers we kind of needed. But in this last year with COVID and lockdown, I took on for most of last year, well, from March to the end of last year, I was chairing 2 Zoom meetings a week. And I did not find that an effort at all. Absolutely the opposite. In fact, it totally energized my recovery. I feel that I've done better last year and was more able to cope with what was clearly a difficult situation for a lot of people, and it would definitely have been so for me in the past, but I was able to cope with it quite well. In fact, in the first month, I said to other GA members, I felt I had been in training for this moment, for that whole really heavy situation, that I'd been in training for it, and I felt, or like almost like a soldier trains for war, they hope they never get it, but when they do, they're prepared, I felt that in my recovery, I'd been training for hard times, quote unquote, and the hard times came, the really, hard times. I mean, there was a period last year I was unemployed, didn't have a lot of prospect of getting work. We were under full lockdown, but doing the 2 meetings a week, during the 2 meetings a week, and then picking up the sponsorship of a person, an interestingly Korean gentleman who came onto the Zoom meetings, and that was one of the other wonderful side effects of having the online meetings, is that we got an interstate and an international audience as well. So it was wonderful. It was wonderful, and I feel blessed to have gone through it. Not that I would wish to be in lockdown again. Don't take it the wrong way.
No, no, it's funny, isn't it? A lot of people enjoyed it and a lot of people hated it because it offered different things to different people in real terms. So it was a very interesting time, that's for sure. So how did the groups cope with lockdown and being on Zoom? Did you feel that people sort of embraced the Zoom sessions?
It's really interesting. There was a lot of people did, and even the ones that were initially skeptical, many of them did, but there were also many that didn't. One or a few that tried and they just couldn't, it didn't work for them for whatever reason. And plenty that didn't even try to get onto the Zoom meeting. So there was definitely no middle ground. I mean, people either really loved them, and in fact, it was interesting to see a number of people jump on and increase the number of meetings they were doing a week. And we had quite a number actually, of new members join who had only ever known the online meetings, had never known the physical world meetings. And, they were doing probably more meetings a week than would have been the case had they started coming to face-to-face meetings. So that was an interesting observation. But with the people that had been coming to meetings, some for many years, who didn't turn up, I mean, a few of those have now started popping up again now that face-to-face meetings are opening, and that's still an ongoing thing. But some haven't. So, look, I mean, every person's journey is their own, and we can't control what others do. But I'm glad that a bunch of people really did latch on and enjoy the meetings online.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so we might take a short break there.
It's been 30 years since the Royal Commission released its final report into Aboriginal deaths in custody. Things have actually got worse, and there is still no justice. Come along to the National Day of Action. Stop Aboriginal deaths in custody. Black Lives Matter. Saturday the 10th of April, 1 p.m. on the steps of Parliament House, Melbourne. Join us in the streets to demand justice and self-determination. See you there.
We have survived the white man's way of, and the heart and the torment of it all. We have survived the white man's way of, and you can't change that.
Black and Deadly Friday, Robbie Sport Radio, Radio 3CR. Yeah, join me at 11 every Friday for some Black and Deadly sound. 3CR, Community Radio 855 on the AM dial. Voice of the people. Black and Deadly Friday, Robbie Sport Radio, Radio 3CR.
Yeah, join me at 11 every Friday for some Black and Deadly sound. 3CR, Community Radio 855 on the AM dial. Voice of the people, the people.
Black and Deadly Friday, Robbie Sport Radio, Radio.
This is the Living Free Show on 3CR, 855 kilohertz on your AM dial and 3CR on digital radio. If you're interested in listening to one of our many podcasts, then either head to your preferred podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, or just Google 3CR Living Free. On our show's webpage, you'll also find details about the Living Free Show and how to contact us. Today I'm talking with Michael, and we're talking about compulsive gambling and about his recovery through Gamblers Anonymous. So Michael, before the break, we were talking about online meetings and sponsorship and the fact that I think you said you had a guy who joined from Korea. So do you want to sort of tell us a bit about what it's like to sponsor somebody over Zoom internationally? Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when he asked me to be his sponsor, and this fellow, I should point out, is quite advanced in age. He's a retiree. He had a very high-level career, had worked in America, and his journey took him through a number of kind of failed attempts to manage his gambling through psychologists and counsellors, and in the end, someone had recommended Gamblers Anonymous, and he jumped onto the meetings, and he somehow found our meeting, the Victorian region Zoom meeting. I mean, language wasn't too much of a barrier, for him. His English is pretty good. Online, obviously, quality can vary, as you know, but, he was doing okay. But I think, I don't know, maybe because I was chairing the meetings, he reached out to me and he asked, because he had heard other people talk about sponsorship and get a sponsor, he asked me to be his sponsor. And I must admit, I was a bit skeptical, only because, well, two reasons. One, I thought, am I ready to do this? Am I ready to take something like this? So I'd never sponsored anyone before. And then I thought, well, he's overseas, we'll only ever be able to meet online. Is this going to work? How's it going to work? And I said to him, look, let's provisionally try, and we'll sort of meet for an hour a week. And I set aside an hour a week to meet online with him. We would have a Zoom call. I got the sort of literature, and we started. And it's like teaching, I guess. They say that if you teach something, it's the best way to learn it, to embed that in yourself. The teacher learns as much as the student. And I honestly felt that. I really, in trying to explain things as we were reading through them and working through the book, I found that my own understanding actually improved. And to be honest, the online aspect of it was kind of neither here nor there. By this stage, I think I'd been doing 6 months or 7 months worth of online meetings. And of course, for work, because I was then back in work, I was doing plenty of online meetings. So it was kind of second nature by that stage.
Yeah, it was sort of normal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, you'd have sort of Zoom coffee catch-ups and sort of, Zoom chats with your mates and Zoom birthday parties for people. So it was normal. I mean, it didn't always work, but in this case, it actually did. And I sent him some material by the post and some electronically, and we're working at a pretty slow pace. An hour a week isn't much, and the guy is 81, so got to give him some benefit there. But the amazing thing about his story is that after 39 years of gambling and really doing quite significant damage, and of getting to an age of 81 where, a lot of us know people who are older that gamble, and it's very hard to discuss it with them or kind of change their behaviours or mindset. The fact that he was willing to try this, and that it's made an impact on his life and the quality of his life and the quality of his relationship with his missus, that's pretty remarkable. And he actually, I've told him this, he's setting a great example for people who might otherwise think, oh, it's too late for me, I'm too old, I've been doing this too many years, I can't change now. But the reality is there is no time limit to change, and it's never too late to get some good years under the belt. And by good, I mean emotionally stable, happy, sane,
Yeah, I think everybody knows an alcoholic, but they don't know that they're alcoholic. And I think the same thing with gamblers. A lot of people know gamblers, but they just don't know they're gamblers.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting point, because I also know somebody who's post 65 who's gambled a lot and has a problem, but won't talk about it at all. Just changes the subject. So being willing to talk to somebody about it is really important. So was this Korean gentleman, had he been to GA in Korea, or was going to Zoom the first time he'd been to a meeting?
No, he had tried going to Korean GA meetings, I think, a couple of years prior.
Yep.
Look, for whatever reason, probably because he wasn't ready yet, he hadn't obviously suffered enough, or maybe he just wasn't, willing enough, because that open-mindedness and that willingness are absolute precursor requirements. You've got to be open-minded and willing when you come into a 12-step program. But for whatever reason, it didn't really work. I've asked him about it on a couple of occasions, and he felt that he couldn't relate to the people there, and maybe because of his advanced age, maybe because of the fact that he was quite a sort of a senior career person and had worked in the States for many years and all that sort of thing. So for whatever reason, he felt he couldn't relate to those people. Now, you might ask, well, why did he relate to a bunch of Australians of much younger age than him, generally, on Zoom? And I can't answer. I don't really know. I've never been to a Korean GA meeting, so I can't tell you what the differences are. But fortunately, he did. He saw something, and he has stuck around. He does his one meeting a week, and we're still working through the steps together, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it reminded me of another story. I was working with some Indian guys in IT, and they were fairly young, and they come out to Australia, and they were working on this project that I was working on. And one of them went back to India for a holiday. His family were trying to get a wife for him, and he came back, and he said he was telling his friends that he would have lunch with this old guy, which was me, and that I was happy for him to be there and have lunch with him. And his friends just couldn't believe that, because that just didn't happen in India. It was very hierarchical, that based on age, and maybe that's the issue.
Could be.
That just being able to cross cultural barriers means that you can break down a few other barriers.
That's actually a really good observation. That hadn't occurred to me, to be honest, Bill. So I'm glad you've given me that thought. That may well be the case. May well be the case.
Also, the other thing that I was interested in talking about was just the difference between addictions, I guess, or compulsions, and sort of the nature of compulsive behaviour. Because a lot of people, I've spoken to people who have food addictions, and one of them had an alcohol addiction as well. And she sort of used alcohol to stop eating. And when she stopped using alcohol, her eating got out of control. And so each one was just an attempt to resolve an issue that was an underlying issue. So what's your take on the similarities between the compulsions that become addictions? So, what is gambling most like?
Well, look, it's funny because it's an interesting thing. I mean, there are clear differences, that's for sure. Gambling's probably more like overeating than it would be than say alcoholism or drug addiction, or addiction to other substances. In the sense that you're not actually taking a substance that has a direct impact on your brain, and its workings. Now, clearly, all compulsions do have an impact on our brains, because the thing that they do have in common is that, we do all of them without regard to the consequences that we know are there. I mean, intellectually, there isn't a single addict out there that doesn't know what the consequences of their addiction are. Every single addict is aware of the damage that they are doing to themselves. I have no doubts about that at all. But the remarkable thing is that we do it despite that knowledge. And despite, people will say things like, think of your family, or think of your partner, or think of your children, think of your mother. And even though that's a fair thing to say, because often the people we're damaging are those people, they're the ones that hurt the most as a result of our behaviours. And despite the fact that we love them and we don't want to hurt them, we still do these things. And that's whether the addiction or compulsion relates to a mind-altering substance or not. And I guess that the commonality there, even for the alcoholic and the drug addict with the compulsive gambler and the overeater, is that the decision point before you take the substance, before you place the bet, before you eat the food, that decision point, at that point, you don't have a substance in you, you haven't done the thing, but that desire is so overwhelming, it will literally just trample your rational mind and trample all thoughts of loved ones. And even though a part of your mind is saying, don't, you know what's going to happen, you know how bad you'll feel, you still do it anyway. Now, I'm not a brain surgeon, a neurologist, or an expert in the workings of the mind, but there's clearly something absolutely consistent across all the compulsions there. And so it's understandable to me that someone might try to manage one, perhaps white knuckle it a bit, and manage to sort of forego doing that addiction, but then will kind of let it out in another way, because they're not necessarily treating, as you say, the underlying symptoms. And I think that's why the 12-step program kind of works across addictions, because as a program, it's not about, there are, for example, if I look at the GA 12 version of the 12-step program, there's very little in there about tips relating to stopping gambling per se. We do have some things like, don't go in or near gambling establishments or whatever. But when you read steps like, do a moral inventory, or accept your powerlessness over your addiction, or handing your life and your will over to a higher power. Those things are common across addictions, and they really, to me, they relate to a sort of a treatment for the soul, and a way that they introduce a way of life that takes your mind out of that mode where you need to escape or damage yourself in order to avoid dealing with things,
Yeah, I think that's the concept of hope. It's the fact that something else can help you where you can't help yourself. So the hopelessness is that I can't change it myself, and the hope is that something can change me.
Yes, yeah, absolutely agree. And I think there's another aspect too. I mean, if I look at myself and my own sort of history with my addiction and my recovery following that, the big difference is that when I was sort of before my recovery, I felt as if not only I could control my environment and myself, but I felt that I had to. I had to be. We lived in a society where if you can't control your situation and be effectively the king of your own castle, that there's something wrong with you. It's a failing, right? And so, we have this sort of individualistic society where we promote people who can kind of do things on their own, achieve on their own, to the extent in some cases where we're leaning on others and needing help is considered, well, a bit negative. It's not seen in a very great light. Whereas in my recovery, I actively seek help. I know that I can't do this on my own. I know that I have to take myself off the pedestal, right? And I think, one of the things, just to, as a quick sidebar, one of the things about the concept of a higher power in 12-step programs is that really the point of that is that you're not the higher power. You don't have to know what it is. You don't have to believe in one. It could be the group. It could be a God of your understanding or whatever it is, but it's just not you. And that's the important thing. I'm not omnipotent. I'm not the decider of all. I don't get to decide how the universe is and how other people around me behave. I just need to control my own reactions and my actions and cope with everything else and learn to cope with everything else.
Yeah. And it's about not being able to control the first thought, but being able to consider the first thought.
Yes.
Comes into your head. You don't have to act on it. Whereas I think prior to getting help, most people, if they have the thought, follow the thought rather than go, well, wondering what's it going to be. There's no ability to consider maybe there's a different path, that I've got a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I myself, I've said to people kind of half jokingly that if my brain comes up with an idea that sounds really, really good and enticing, it's probably coming from not a great place, and I should probably do the opposite. That sounds like a bit of a gag, but it's true. I mean, often, I struggle with procrastination. I struggle with motivation. I'm trying to get fit at the moment, lose a bit of the COVID weight, and motivating myself to get out of bed in the mornings to sort of do my exercise is a struggle. I'll admit it. My brain tells me, just lie in here for another 15 minutes, and so usually I force myself to kind of do the opposite. It doesn't always work. I'm a work in progress, but and I guess that comes back to one of the things again that's also common with addicts is that the behaviors and the compulsions and the whatever it is in our brains that drives that circuitry, genetic predisposition, whatever it is, it's still there. It's just that we've created, hopefully through recovery, new neural pathways and new options for responses. We don't have to go down those other neural pathways. We can choose to do something different, which will lead to a different outcome and a different mindset.
Yeah, it's thinking about that thought and thinking about the consequences of the thought and what that might do. Okay, well, so we might take another short break there.
Earth Greetings have been making sustainable beautiful since 2003. Their 100% recycled cards, plastic-free stationery and earth-friendly gifts are made in Australia with the lightest possible planetary footprint. Shop online at earthgreetings.com.au or at one of over 500 stockists Australia-wide. Earth Greetings is a 3CR supporter.
Tune in to Billabong Beats Tuesdays at 11 a.m. with me, Gavin Moore, giving a voice to both Western Kulin and Kulin First Nations peoples. Join me to talk about philosophy and Dreamtime stories surrounding the waterhole, the sacred fire, the land, the plants and animals. Billabong Beats, 11 a.m. Tuesdays on 3CR.
This is the Living Free Show on 3CR, on digital radio and live streaming on 3cr.org.au/streaming. I'm talking with Michael about compulsive gambling and his recovery through Gamblers Anonymous. So, Michael, before the break, we were talking about, I guess, choices and the chance that people have to do things differently. But is it difficult to reach people who gamble, who are not so much in denial, but sort of don't know they've got a problem? You know, at what point did you, I guess, consider you had a problem yourself before you got found out about your gambling?
I knew I had a problem probably for about a year before I got found out. And I knew because of just how compulsive my behaviour was and how no matter what sort of self-roadblocks I tried to put in my own way, I would always take the same path. I would always dismantle those roadblocks and just charge on through and keep going. And of course, it's funny in the sense that just like what I imagine would be the case with substance-based addictions, once the fog lifts and your rational mind comes back, you realise what you've done. You realise all of it. You know, you have full rational awareness. There's no trace of the compulsion in you at that point, but it's too late. And the thing is, the fact that you don't have a trace of that compulsion in you at that moment, and you can swear black and blue on your children's lives to the God of whatever you believe in, you can swear black and blue that you won't do it again, and yet you will. And I knew, because I was going through that terrible cycle again and again, on my own and in silence and not really appreciating that there was any alternative. I knew that there was something wrong with me. Gamblers Anonymous or anything like that hadn't come into my mind. I didn't know that was an option. I can't say I had really considered it. And certainly when I got to GA, it was effectively, I was kind of compelled to, I won't say I was forced to, but I was, compelled by my wife to well, you better do something about this, right? Or else it's over. So I didn't seek it out, but sort of having gotten there, I guess, when you get to a hospital, it doesn't really matter, how you got to the emergency. You're there, you're bleeding, and you start getting treatment and you start feeling a bit better.
Yeah, that's right. Just the thought of getting better improves you. So I guess the scary thing about gambling or stopping gambling is that what will you put in its place? In real terms, you've dedicated a lot of your life to this activity, and you probably think you're pretty good at it, but it's something that you're going to have to stop. So is that a bit of a scary thing, thinking what you'd replace it with?
Absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a void, because I can't speak for the other addictions, but certainly with gambling, you spend so many hours doing it and so much time thinking about it and then planning on doing it and scheming on how to, get money to do it. It really is quite all encompassing. And then when you remove that and you replace it with, a couple of hours of meetings a week, well, that still leaves a lot of free time. And it is scary. It's scary for a number of reasons. One is boredom is a big kind of trigger for a lot of people. So having free time is not necessarily a great thing, but also you're kind of alone with your thoughts. And that's often one of the reasons that people seek out these sort of behaviours, is because they don't want to be alone with their thoughts. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. And so you've got to kind of attack it in a couple of ways. I mean, the program is part of that, but it's not going to sort of, occupy you 16 hours a day, right? So you do have to find healthy things to do. Now, whether that's throwing yourself into work initially or, taking up new hobbies, sports, fitness, whatever, you've got to absolutely find something to do, because if you're in a situation where you're bored for many hours a day, that is a really, really dangerous place to be for someone who's early in their recovery.
Yeah. So also talking about family, so you mentioned that your wife was a major force in you seeking help by giving you an ultimatum. Is that something that families can do with gamblers? Because most gambling or drug addictions, people tend to isolate a bit and they tend to lie a lot. And so families are pretty much in the dark about what's happening unless they see the behaviour, and a lot of it's hidden. So is there anything the families can do, in real terms?
Yeah, look, that's a difficult question. And it's difficult for a couple of reasons. One is every situation is different. I don't know that there's a blanket rule. I mean, if I look at the fellowship I'm in, there are people there that are still with their partners and still with their family who was with them from before they came into afterwards. And many of those people say, I couldn't have done it without them, and so lucky that they stuck by me. And there are also many others whose partners left or their families broke down before they came in, and yet they still did and try to sort of make amends and perhaps have improved the relationship with an ex or with children. Not always, but sometimes. And so I don't know that there's something universal that a family can do. But the second reason why I think that's a tricky question is because those people are not just there to aid the addict. They're not sort of props in the addict's life. They are their own individuals, human beings with their own lives. They have to protect themselves and make sure that they get to live the best life they can. And in some circumstances, for those individuals, that may mean leaving, and for others, it may mean trying to help the addict. And I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule. For those addictions where there is like Al-Anon, and there used to be a Melbourne meeting of Gam-Anon, which are basically the 12-step programs for family and friends of addicts, which is really, it's not about how to help the addicts, it's about how to help themselves and to be in that situation as best as they can, whatever that means for them. And I think, it's important that people seek out that help for themselves. And if that can help the addict, that's great. But, addicts should not be relying on other people to try and make it right for them. We have to make it right for ourselves. And I think everyone has to make their situation right for themselves.
Yeah. So a lot of trust gets burnt in a relationship with lies and deception, and gambling is probably one of the major ones that triggers those feelings of lack of trust. So how did you rebuild the trust with your family?
Look, the bottom line is that I didn't control and I couldn't control whether trust was given back, when it was given back, to what extent it was kind of rebuilt. I accepted that as difficult it may be to realise that a year into recovery or 2 years into recovery, there are still circumstances that trigger distrust. And I can honestly say, I wouldn't even know that explicitly, but I would visually see a response, whether it could be a kind of a raising of eyebrows or a sort of a tone of voice that to me indicated that I wasn't being trusted about something. And to be fair, part of that was probably my own. So I was so sensitive to the fact that I had done all these things and that I wasn't trustworthy, that I still felt as if I was being kind of judged in every sort of interaction, or in some interactions, And the irony is, and I'm sure a lot of addicts can relate to this, I would get asked in the early days things like, "Oh, what did you have for lunch at work?" And there are many times when I would lie. And don't ask me why, honestly. I mean, what that has to do with compulsive gambling or recovering, I couldn't tell you. But I guess the habit of lying to cover up what you've been doing and not telling the truth was so ingrained that sometimes when you get this sort of unexpected question about something inconsequential, the automatic response is just to respond with a story. You were a bit late. Oh, yeah, car broke down, had a flat tire. I mean, I can smile about it now. But I guess, look, the overall message is you can't control whether or to what extent people will give you trust again. And you know what? We just have to live with that. It just is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember talking with an alcoholic, and she had a daughter, and they were doing something in the kitchen, and I think they had a party or something, and she reached for a glass of soda water and it was wet on the outside and slipped out of her hands and broke on the bench. And her daughter immediately rushed outside because she felt her mother must have been drinking. To do that, she must have been drinking.
Yeah.
And it was sort of overwhelming for her. And, just for the daughter to realise that it was just a slippery glass, it wasn't her mother drunk again. Yeah, sort of shot it home to her how much impact it has on other people.
Absolutely.
And how you can't control that impact. So how did it affect your marriage?
Well, look, I consider myself one of the incredibly lucky people whose partners stuck with them. And the way I sort of tried to make amends is by being, totally honest about what I had done, about what I was thinking. And I had asked my wife on a number of occasions, whenever we would sort of talk about the past, and I would say, "Why did you stick with me?" Right? What did you see? Her response was, "Well, I saw a good person, and so it was worth, fighting for that." And that's very humbling, because often we don't see ourselves as worthy. We often feel as if other people judge us as unworthy. And to hear something so lovely said about you is incredibly humbling, because that's certainly not how I viewed myself. And so I'm incredibly lucky. I guess to answer your question about how did it affect my marriage, because we were still only together for a short time before I got to GA, I can't say for a fact like what the difference was afterwards. We hadn't sort of established many years of a pattern to then see it change. I know because my journey over the years led me into recovery, and then I actually sort of walked away from the program for a number of years before coming back. And so my journey has impacted the family, because in those years when I was sort of away from the program, and my kids were teenagers or young teens, I probably emotionally impacted them. And, I'd say that was a bit significant. But, the best thing we can do is to be a better person today. It's the difference between guilt and shame, and I acknowledge what I've done. I feel guilty for it, and my guilt motivates me to be a better person today. Whereas shame, I believe now that I do have a good heart. So what she saw in me all those years ago, saying, oh, you're a good person, I now see that as well. And so I, by no means perfect, but believe me, I'm still a work in progress and will be till the day I die. But it's a motivator to do as best as I can and be the best person I can be today. And each day is its own day, and some days are better than others, and some days are worse than others. But each day is an opportunity to strive for hope, and that's the difference between today and 20 years ago, 23 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. If anybody would like to find out more about Gamblers Anonymous, you can phone them in Victoria on 03 9696 6108 or go online at gaaustralia.org.au for more information about meetings or phone contacts throughout Australia. That's about all we've got time for today. So I'd like to thank Michael for sharing his gambling recovery story with us and talking about how Gamblers Anonymous has helped him. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Bill.
I hope you'll be able to join us again next week when we'll feature Inga, who's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and stay tuned now for more Radical Radio on 3CR.
Kufiyas are Palestinian scarves, and they're a symbol of support for justice for the Palestinian people. Buying one will support the last remaining factory in Hebron that makes kufiyas, and all proceeds from the sales support projects in Palestine, especially Gaza, as well as local solidarity organisations. From the traditional black and white kufiya to an array of modern designs, all scarves are just $30 each. Explore the range and order online, or drop by 3CR during business hours. We're your support for the rights of Palestinians. Go to kufiyas.org.au, that's KUFIYAS.org.au, a 3CR supporter.